imagine this. You just got a brand new game from your aunt in England, but you're American, and so is a GameCube. So you put the game in, and it was a huge pain in the ass this generation, especially for me, because I lived in all these different continents with different region locks. And oh, my friend, it wasn't just the video games. The biggest proponent of, oh, let's call it feature, was DVD movies.
Coming soon on video and DVD.
Your DVD or video game region had to match the region of your DVD player or console. And it wasn't binary, oh boy no. The GameCube had 4 regions: NTSC-U for America and Asia, PAL for Europe, NTSC-J for Japan, and NTSC-K for Korea. And at least there were physical differences in these consoles. If you didn't know, people jizz over the component cables because nobody wanted them when they were actually around, and now they're super expensive. They basically give you the crispest, sharpest output image to your TV, and you can especially tell the difference on modern TVs. But the PAL GameCube never had the digital output, and as such, the PAL GameCubes aren't really coveted these days. Sorry, bud. As long as you acquire the games legally, just play on the Dolphin emulator. It's ridiculously good. And it wasn't just the GameCube that was region locked. The PS2 and the Xbox were as well, and so were the consoles in the previous generation, and the generation before that, and the generation before that. Ooh boy, let me explain something to you younglings. Let's say you go on a trip to Hong Kong, and you see, oh my god, these DVDs are so cheap, way cheaper than back home, so you, in your infinite business savvy, decide, I can just sell them for profit back home. But oh my friend, you play right into the hands of the multi-billion-dollar DVD corporations, because those DVDs ain't gonna work. For DVDs, there were a total of 9 regions. 0 meant no region lock. 1 through 6 for these respective countries. 7 for pre-release media discs in Asia. And 8 for international venues like aircrafts. And again, the DVD region lock had to match your DVD player. But there wasn't actually any hardware level incompatibility. Your player had the capability to play any disc. It just chose not to based on the region lock, which meant you could change the region code on your DVD player. On PCs and Macs, you could change your region code about 5 times before it'd be permanently locked on the firmware level. And for most DVD players, you could enter a special code in the remote that would allow you to change your region lock. And these days, you can find online resources to find these codes, because who the f cares about this shit anymore? And even on your PCs and stuff, technically you could flash the firmware to unlock it to play all kinds of regions. And there's tons of software to rip DVDs to play them completely region-free. And some players like VLC will completely ignore region locks unless the hardware itself prohibits it from playing. So why in God's name would companies go through so much effort to create different discs for 9 different regions?
Here comes the money!
Here we go. Money talk.
Basically, any reason just boils down to money. The first one is in the late 90s and the early aughts. After a movie's released at a cinema, instead of releasing it on streaming, it's released on DVDs. And as you can imagine, releasing it on something physical with millions of copies to be manufactured is a lot more expensive than just releasing it on some server. So in order to mitigate costs in one go, DVD manufacturers would often have staggered releases. And in order to avoid gray market importing from one region where it is released to another where it's not, region codes were implemented. And the second reason is they had different prices in different regions. In low-income countries, they'd sell them for cheaper, and in higher-income countries, they'd sell them for more. And again, you in your infinite wisdom would decide, I'll just import them from where they're cheaper, but that would eat into the company's profits, hence region locks. That's actually kind of shitty, because they could afford to sell those movies at those low prices in those low-income countries. They just wanted even more money from white people in white countries. Just kidding, it had
nothing to do with race and everything to do with
income.
But any capitalist society is bound to run into greediness, which is why I'm a staunch proponent of communism. Oh, you were about to? Yeah, I was gonna. Yeah, I thought you weren't gonna admit it. No, I'm totally a commie. Yeah, my bad. There were other uses for region locks as well. One was that different countries usually have different censorship laws. Not all of them can be as free as America. So sometimes certain things would be censored in certain regions. Suffice to say, there was absolutely nothing beneficial to the consumer from region locking. It wasn't always malice that necessitated region locks. In fact, the first region locks weren't even really region locks. It all started with NTSC and PAL. Okay, quick engineering lesson. So today, we mostly operate in the digital space. Your phones, your computers, and even your TVs understand ones and zeros. And that means when information is transferred around, it's usually transferred in binary. So imagine this. If we want to transfer information, both the sending and the receiving side have to agree that we're transferring, let's say, the English language. If I speak English and transfer that, and you on the receiving end understand French and expect French, well, you're gonna be confused as to what the hell is going on. You might be able to understand a few things, but overall, you're not gonna interpret it correctly. That's basically NTSC versus PAL. There are just standards to interpret data correctly, i.e. you and I both agree that this means this and this means this, so that there's no confusion. And just like a language, if I send an NTSC signal to someone who understands PAL, well, it might play, but it might play at the wrong speed, or show the wrong colors. NTSC was predominantly the standard in North America, and Japan for some reason, while PAL for the rest of the world. The world wasn't really as connected as it is today, so we had different broadcasting standards, and different electronic standards. Like North America has 120 volts at 60 Hz coming out of the mains, while the rest of the world has 220 to 240 volts at 50 Hz. And because the refresh rates of the TVs were usually tied to the frequency of the mains, PAL regions are usually 50 FPS, or half that, 25, while NTSC regions are 60 FPS, or half that, 30. Fun fact, have you ever noticed flickering when using your phones or recording video? This is because of NTSC versus PAL. If your lights are connected to a PAL source and get 230 volts at 50 Hz, but your camera is an NTSC camera which records at 60 Hz, the mismatch in frequencies causes the flickering. So when VHS was around, it was inherently region locked, because an NTSC player is going to mess up playing PAL tapes, and vice versa, because the information is encoded differently. But the blank VHS tapes sold worldwide are the same, just like the blank DVD sold worldwide. But the difference is, the VHS has the information encoded differently, but the DVDs do not. They just have a little bit of extra information which says what region they are, but the rest of the information is basically the same. Apart from DVDs, most people probably remember region locks for video games, and boy was it just as annoying. When video games first started coming out, consoles like the Atari 2600 didn't technically have region locks, but because of NTSC versus PAL, if you put a PAL game in an NTSC console, it would have massive glitches, just because of the different standards. But it was all fun and games cause Nintendo hadn't come in yet. Nintendo's a bitch. Seriously, it's one of the most anti-consumer companies I know of. If you thought the modern debacle of them taking down gameplay videos or shutting down Smash tournaments was a new thing, it's not. Nintendo's always been a dick to its consumers, and it all started with the NES. Nintendo pulled a lot of crap during this era, but since we're talking about region locks, let's stick with that. From the first major home console, Nintendo had stringent region locks. The NES had both a physical lock, because the cartridges would be different sizes, and a lockout chip to enforce region locking. And this was the first time it wasn't even technically necessary, because the NES and the Famicom were both NTSC. It was strictly done for monetary and control reasons. The SNES and the N64 continued the tradition with both physical and electronic lockouts, and once they switched to discs, they just continued with the electronic lockouts. Sony also enforced region locks on the PS1 and the PS2, for games and for DVDs on the PS2. The Xbox and the Xbox 360 are also region locked. Sega also kinda enforced region locks, but really a half-assed effort. But overall, all of them have some form of region locks. Most of the time when you pull this kind of shit, people usually find a way around it. When cartridges were the norm, adapters were available to get around both the physical and the technical locks. When discs were the norm, you usually disc swapped, entering your action replay or swap magic disc first, and then swapping it for your foreign game disc. You could also mod your console to make it completely region free, because again, it wasn't a physical limitation, just a regional lockout enforced by these companies. Okay, so like I explained, I'm a citizen of the world. I lived in the UK, the US, and in India with this iPhone, which I bought in America because I happened to be there when I needed a phone. And as long as you buy an unlocked phone from Apple, you shouldn't really have any problems switching SIMs and using it anywhere in the world. But that's not really the case if you're a Samsung boy. So if you buy your phone from AT&T, Verizon, or T-Mobile, and it's on contract, you're usually locked to the carrier you're contracted to. And if you buy an unlocked phone from Apple, you can put any SIM in it. But even if you buy an unlocked Samsung phone, it's still locked to the region it was purchased in. You have to make a call for 5 minutes using a SIM that's local to the region of the phone, and that's when it'll unlock. Or sometimes you have to enter an unlock code, the information is kinda sketchy. This again is done to prevent importing of phones from places where it's cheaper. Although, I don't understand how Samsung is profiting off this move, because places like India have more expensive phones because of taxes. Why the f does Samsung care whether the government makes money or not? In today's day and age, region locks as they were are pretty much dead. Blu-rays used to have region codes, but they were mitigated to only 3 regions. Most of the region checking was mitigated to the Blu-ray playing software rather than a firmware level lock on the player, and it's estimated that the majority of Blu-rays sold were region-free anyways. 4K Blu-rays have yet to implement region locking, so all of them are essentially region-free, but all of this is moot because we don't really even use physical media anymore. And with video games as well, you don't really have to worry about region locks anymore. They technically can still be implemented, but publishers are heavily discouraged from implementing them. Sony pretty much dropped region locks from the PS3 onwards, although 2 games, Persona 4 Arena and Joy Sound Dive, are still region locked on the PS3. Also, if you use the older composite standard where NTSC and PAL still matter, you might experience some graphical glitches while playing a foreign game. And PS1 and PS2 games are still region locked to your PS3's region. PS4 and PS5 do have region locking capabilities, but they've never been utilized. The Xbox and Xbox 360 are region locked, but the Xbox One onwards are not. Nintendo was the first one to introduce region locks and the last one to get rid of them, with even the Wii U being region locked. But thankfully, the Switch is completely region free, except the Chinese console and games. Although one thing to note is that when you buy a game from one region, the DLC you're allowed to purchase is still locked to that region. So in essence, the DLC is still locked. And physical media might be dead, but streaming services like Netflix still adopt region locks by making certain content only available in certain regions. You can only bypass them by masking your IP to a different region. Which is why this video is sponsored by Express. I'm just kidding, I'm not big enough to be sponsored. YouTube sometimes makes certain videos unavailable in certain regions. Instagram sometimes warns you that your video is blocked in Russia or whatever. But all in all, as the world gets more connected, regional differences like these start to go away. And perhaps some people don't even know what I'm talking about. If you didn't move countries a whole lot during your life, you might not have even run into this problem. I guess it makes some consoles, DVD players, or games unique or whatever. But I, for one, am glad that region locks are a thing of the past.